It's a bit of a challenge because I would like to listen to you more as a listener, and then I'm thinking, I have a presentation also, I need to speak something. So I think thank you so much, and I think we should carry this conversation forward. It's been a fantastic presentation. Let's kind of... There is also to wake up if anybody was fast asleep, but I don't think anybody was. Before I start, I want to say that if you want, IIM also has been doing some innovations and experiments in the space of online digital learning. And if you would like to know how we might do everything at a similar scale, at a significantly lower cost, the way Indians do things by way of jugaad, that means if you spend $1 million, how can we do that with probably a few 100,000? Please come and talk to us, and we'll be happy to share that with you. But I've seen the Harvard X classroom. It's absolutely fantastic, and would be happy to show you what we recreated as a kind of a low-cost version of that. I have a picture of that. Maybe I'll show you that later. Okay, but I wanted to really, we have about 20 minutes, and I really want to start with a question to you, asking you, when did you stop learning? Not start, stop. I know some of you are really annoyed with me. You're telling me that, well, I know I stopped learning. You learn all the time, right? And so why is it then we expect others to stop learning? You stop learning when you finish your 10th, when you're 12th, when you're engineering, when you start working, and so on. I think this fundamentally, as human beings, we continue to learn. We continue to learn through formal and informal channels. Mostly we assume learning stops when formal channels of education stop, but in reality we continue learning. And if that's the case, why don't we take education forward in the way that people naturally learn, that is, learn all their lives? Can we extend formal channels of education to really, their lifetimes? That's really the question. To answer that question, I think we need to go back also and talk about a few trends. So while, Professor Narayan, you've been just so specific and so detailed, I'm going to just look at the larger picture. And I think, in a way, it complements what you said. If you look at the economy is changing. There is really no doubt about it. I mean, this is an OECD projection which shows that India will hit $6 trillion GDP by 2028. And I was really impressed with it until I heard yesterday that Apple is already $1 trillion. So clearly, it's not so impressive anymore. But the fact is that the economy is growing, and a lot of this growth in the economy is also related to the way technologies are changing. So you can go through a whole range of technologies, from bio, nano, ICT, a whole range of technologies. But I don't really want to talk about it. I just wanted to talk about technologies in education, for instance. So this is the famous Gartner hype curve, and you can see a whole range of technologies, and this is a bit old in 2016, but you can see a whole range of technologies from MOOC platforms, by the way, have moved from innovation triggers to now plateau productivity. So, what has really happened is what Gartner assumed would take about 5 to 10 years is actually just taken about 2 years. And so on. Now we have a lot of hype about AI and in a whole range of other things. And you will find that every time technology is outstepping expectations, at least in the field of education. And that's really fascinating. That's actually the point I think you were also trying to make. The third trend I think is really worth looking at is people are changing. We're now talking about, we talked about the baby boomer generation, and we talked about generation X, Y, Z. And when you ran out of alphabets, you got into generation alpha. And then you will get into maybe beta, those yet unborn, and so on. But you really have a set of people who are really very much unlike anyone who has been there before, in terms of the orientation, in terms of the way they learn, in terms of the outlook on life, in terms of the fact that many of them are likely to be global citizens. I just picked up this data on, on population in India, and you can see, even if you look at the demographic spread, you find that India is really a young population. Add to that the fact that, put all of this together, globalization is happening, economy is changing, technology is changing, people are changing, and the natural result of all of this is jobs are changing. And I just picked up this report that was published in 2010, which looked at the most likely hot jobs in 2030. I've just picked up the top 10. There were 20 jobs, and some of them are already jobs out there. But it's very interesting. Have you heard of any of this before? Maybe old age wellness, but that's it, right? Vertical farming is now becoming more popular. This report was written in 2010, and it's interesting. If you go back to that report, the reference is somewhere there, you will find that many of the jobs they potentially identified as jobs that would come up in the next 10 to 20 years, some of them have already come up. In fact, number 13, very strangely, the unlucky number 13 happens to be avatar managers, and avatar managers in the context of teachers. How do you create avatars? Teachers will create avatars that will very specifically individualize learning for students and so on. So, so those kind of things, and you could actually go back to the report. So if jobs are going to be different, then skills that are required are also going to be different. And here's actually a report that came more recently talking about the future skills 2020. And some of those things you don't even understand. Some of those, we understand, and people have talked about it yesterday and today, and so on. But from sense making to social intelligence to design thinking, of course, everybody talks about cognitive load management to, whole range of other things. Now, this is not to throw a lot of jargon at you. I mean, MBA schools are very good for that. But simply to tell you that the world as we know is completely changing. And then the next question that you ask is, why is this world changing? What is it that's driving this change? And in my mind, there are three things that's happening. One is, of course, globalization. This chart actually shows the number of students moving globally in master's programs, and that was about 4 million, according to OECD last year. It is slated to go up to 6 million by the end of 2020. And by 2025 or so, I don't remember the exact number, it's supposed to go up to 20 million. In other words, you have globalization happening everywhere, but you have globalization happening at an unprecedented rate in the area of education, and especially in the area of higher education. And I'm not sure how many of Harvard students are global. What percentage is global? 40%. See, there you have it. In fact, I once taught a school in, program in Cardiff, 300 students in a large hall like this. I think 80% of them are Indians. So I know universities in the UK that actually ship the charter planes to take students there. So UK, Australia, Europe, and maybe not so much US now, thanks to Trump and others. But they're basically becoming magnets for students globally, right? So education is getting globalized. Not only that, the Harvards of the world are really coming into India. So, Harvard already has a kind of an executive education center in Mumbai, and several other schools are coming to India. So what's really happening is students are becoming footloose and global. Global brands are really kind of moving very freely, and education, of course, technology has made it feasible for you to get a degree without really moving out of your bedroom, as Professor Narayan was just pointing out. And also the fact that, you find that faculty are also becoming quite global. So it's not very uncommon for a faculty from here to be teaching in half a dozen countries in any 1 year and so on. So that's the globalization that's really happening. The second is really the role of technology in disrupting. Education is being disrupted, and I will come to that in a little while. The university, as we know, is really being changed, and the change is really very rapid. And the third, I think, is really most important. Today, people are saying they need really high quality of education, and they are saying, do we really need to pay so much to get good education? So there is an increasing clamor for high quality education. This is what I might call as the democratization of education, thanks to technology and globalization and all of that. That's really happening. So put all these trends together, and then you look at the way we have been teaching and learning, and we find that that's really outdated. So if you look at the 20th century model, which says, let's put the faculty and the student together intensively and get them to match their wits against each other, which is what would happen in a regular classroom here, typically, in most MBA schools, we are saying that's not the model we should be looking at, because the 21st century learner is really nothing like that. What is that Generation Alpha or Gen Z or what are they like? They are, in a way, very distracted digital natives. The point that you made, they can't pay attention to anything for more than 2 minutes. I think their MIT research showed it was 6 minutes, but it doesn't. Between 2 and 6, there is really no difference, really. But they're digital natives. They understand technology more than any one of us. And I always like to give this example that when I can't get my phone to work, I give it to my elder daughter. When she can't get it to work, she gives it to her younger sister. So in a way, you have now, people, in the younger they are, the more technologically savvy they are, and so on. These students are visually oriented, and they're very impatient. They learn through a multitude of ways. They focus on skills. They're not really looking for information. They look for personalization. They're looking for new experiences. And they see education more as a way of, not as a one-shot thing, but as a lifelong activity. So if that's the kind of animal, in quotes, that you're going to teach in the classroom, how can you apply the old pedagogical techniques? So what is today required is probably an asynchronous, need-based education. And my favorite example of this is to say that your students probably have a biorhythm which is very different from yours. As I grow older, I get up at earlier and earlier in the day. So I'm up sometimes at 4 or 5, and I go to sleep by 9. My students, and I know that because I have a teenage daughter, she's awake at 10 in the night, and then she goes to sleep at 4 in the morning. And so, if you want to be an effective teacher, you have to be up at 10 in the night, and it's not really practical for me. And so we have to understand that these students are very different. I'm not saying, pamper them. I'm simply saying the way they learn is very different. The way they learn is, also more social. That's the point that we're making. So let's look at traditional models. Traditional models of education. The first definition of excellence we have is we keep people out. We have defined excellence as exclusion. So these institutions are great because they don't admit people. What a strange, terrible, horrible way to define excellence. We claim we're really good because 250,000 students apply here, we select 500. I would define excellence just the opposite. I would say excellence is the way that you admit 250,000 students and allow 500 of them to leave the gates. Because your certification should be, you're certifying to say somebody is qualified because of the process that you put in. You're not certifying to say that I certify this person is good enough to come in. And so that's the way you have to look at, and there's a problem. Traditionally, high quality education has been legacy and location constraint. You have to be in the right place at the right time, and you need to have the right genes. And by genes, I mean you must have very rich parents or very smart, genes. You must be really smart. Otherwise, you don't really make it anywhere. So it's in a way, it's kind of, things are pre-programmed in a way. And of course, traditionally as teachers, we passed off information as insight. That was good in a world where students didn't have access to information. I remember the case studies that I did were 20 pages long. 10 pages would be description of the company. Today, nobody wants to read the description of the company. They know more about the company than you can possibly tell them. They will refer to Wikipedia for that, right? We have traditionally perceived education as linear from class 1 to 2 to 3 to 10 to 12 and so on, and sequential in terms of the way topics are taught. We have seen technology as add-on, and I'm so glad you don't see that as add-on and you see it as enabling and so on. And we have seen learning mostly as a one-shot kind of experience and a passport to a better life. That's the old model. That is a model that needs to be changed if you really want to transform education. So what are the changing paradigms? The changing paradigms would be, let's have excellence as inclusive. The more we take in, and the more we are able to graduate, that is really an excellent institution. Learning is lifelong. It's non-linear. It is not sequential. It need not be. And learning is very social in its nature, peer-to-peer, some of the points that you are making, that people learn from each other collaboratively and so on. It's not a download of information from the faculty to, a set of students who are literally jailed and held there because they have to be there and so on. And finally, technology has not add-on but has blended in. If that's the new paradigm that we are going to use, then you might find education gets a completely new meaning. For instance, and I'm borrowing this from a comment made by Anant Agarwal, who is the CEO of edX. But basically, the question really is, what if we could provide education at zero marginal cost? This country needs it. If you look at the cost of education in this country, in fact, if you look at the inflation, you can't see that very clearly there. It's college textbooks and college studies that have become really most expensive relatively, compared to even, everybody talks about the price of vegetables. Nobody talks about the price of school education. If you're a young kid you send to a school in Bangalore, you pay a hell lot of money for that, right? If you look at what does it cost to educate your kids in India, you can't see those numbers. But typical engineering education, I can tell you, 3 to 4 lakhs is what you would pay in a regular college. 10 lakhs is what you would pay in a private college. 1 crore is what you would pay if you send your kid outside India. So that's the kind of cost we're talking about. If we can slash off those costs and still provide a very high quality level of education, we should certainly use technology. And that's where I think technology really plays a role. But if you have to do that, you have to reimagine learning. Not the way learning is currently perceived as, kind of locked into a kind of, I might call a fatal embrace between the faculty and the student. Because both really need each other, right? We have to think of absolutely new ways. And I think the new model is unbundling education. What is unbundling? The classic example is Khan Academy, and I really like the byline. You only have to know one thing, that you can learn anything. And of course, anytime, anywhere, and all of that stuff, and anyone. Look at the way the traditional classrooms have been visualized. The traditional visualization of the class, if you go back 2, 3, 4 centuries, we all learned under a tree, under a guru. At least that's what we hear. And you look at the 1920s, everybody sat prim and proper in a classroom, and you had a teacher who kind of told you things. If you look at 2010s, you have interactive boards, digital boards technology, and it's a very technology-enabled classroom. So that's a changing phase of the classroom. And if I push that trend a little bit further, I would say the future is Google as the guru. And we depend on Google for everything. That's the first port of call, and that's often the last port of call, really. So learning has got very individual and personalized. Just a couple of days ago, my daughter said, "Let me make an omelette," and I was really pleased. She never enters the kitchen. She said that, and then she walked into the computer room. And the kitchen is in the opposite direction. I was really surprised. I asked, I was trying to figure out, how do you make an omelette in the study room? And she said, "I'm going to Google it." And so and she's 16, and she'll be very annoyed if she hears that I said this. But the fact of the matter is, we really depend on Google so much. Sometimes I think Google is not guru, but Google is God. But the fact is, we have to live with it, right? And so, if that's the case, if information is freely available, then we have to really change our models of education. And the model of education, and of course, if education is being unbundled, if universities are being unbundled, we are saying we're moving from, I know what is best for you model to a cafeteria kind of model, where you go in and say, well, I want this and this and this, and I will take this. And maybe it's not a balanced meal, but this is fine for me. And who decides it's a balanced meal? It's actually the employer. So if that happens, then the role that we have as faculty or institutions or places of learning that determine curriculum, what should be learned, what should be the overall curriculum, all of that is going to be challenged. And actually, that day is not really far away. You're actually talking about using VR and so on. I really like this video. Let me show you a few minutes of this. How, of course, this is not real, but the company is real, and the visualization is a little bit, more than what is possible today, I think, but certainly it's probably likely to come in the next 1 or 2 years. Let me see if that plays. Okay. Tutor ABC is a company that does very personalized learning. The audio is not working now, but I can explain what this is. There's someone who really wants to learn about New York. She's visiting New York. So the lady talks to the tutor, and as he moves along, he's wearing his Google glasses, I guess, and she gets a first-hand view of the New York City. She gets a pretty good insight into the sights and smells of New York. And of course, she learns the language. I mean, this is learning that's very personalized, very contextualized, and frankly, relatively cheaper than what would be in any other situation. And you can do that in multiple ways and so on. So there are, of course, experiments of that kind. There are even more modern experiments some of it which sometimes makes one a little scared as to whether we would turn out to be relevant. I mean, the best example that I like to quote is Professor Ashok Goel, incidentally also an Indian professor located at Georgia Tech, who said, let me see if I can use AI bots to really act as teaching assistants for my course. So in his very popular course on AI, he actually had 13 flesh and blood TAs and 2 virtual bots, one of whom was called Jill Watson, and there was the other name, I forget, some other Watson. And they made the lady a little more smarter than I understand than the gentleman, I'm not sure why. But he put forward this challenge to his students that can you identify who the AI bot is, who's the non-real person? And interestingly, most students could not, and they tried. They're smart students, right? Because they had a whole backlog of all the FAQs and so on, so these AI bots could really have a pretty good conversation. And it got so interesting that Jill Watson was invited out for dinner by one of the students. And last year, they nominated Jill Watson to be the best TA in Georgia Tech. So there is, of course, that's one step. The next step is really the faculty. So there is really a change. And you can see, I just use that hype cover again to show that a lot of new technologies are really coming in. And of course, MOOCs is really one element in that. I don't want to really spend a lot of time talking about MOOCs, but just tell you that if you look at the data currently, there are totally 81 million students, 800 plus universities, 9.5 thousand courses in every possible discipline that you can think of. For a 6-year-old, really 6-year-old, if you can look at 2011, 2012 as the beginning of formally what is called as MOOCs, then you can see that it's a stupendous growth. Nothing in the past has really grown like that. And to expect that you will not be swept away by this wave, I think is either you're very prescient or you're very foolhardy. And so we really need to look at this very carefully. In fact, if you look at the way this field has been emerging, you find that from independent courses, now things have really kind of, because of people who have come in and tried to monetize these models, you've now come into a situation where you have a whole range of specializations, degrees, and so on. The last count I checked, there were at least 20 full-blown degrees, including one on masters in computer applications, which were exactly the same as that is offered on campus. And there are many such examples, but lack of time, I'm not able to talk about it. But look at the way these have come, really. We had master's degrees, then that's what we traditionally have. Now we have micro-masters, nano degrees. They have not reached atomic degrees. I just thought the next thing would be atomic degrees, basically. You learn one topic very clearly and so on. So if you see it somewhere, remember that you saw it here first. But basically, the way things are really moving is that things are getting smaller and smaller. And very focused. That's what I meant by saying that people are learning for skills and knowledge and not really for getting a certificate, because the certification process itself is now getting challenged significantly. So if put all of this together, we're now saying education is at an inflection point. And we have to recognize that it is really the next hot sector for innovation. And you can see that. But of course, the part of this inflection is also the chaotic nature of education. And if you map all of that, and I think there are a few things we can really map and talk about. One, learning has become personal and social. It's become mastery-based, as I said, smaller and smaller. It's become very entrepreneurial. There are a large number of entrepreneurial companies that are doing this. In fact, one of the companies that I always look to, and I'm really proud to say it's an Indian company, Upgrad. The average age of the founder and the chief tech officer and the chief marketing officer, all of them, is somewhat like maybe, slightly 3 or 4 years, maybe 5 years older than my kid. And they're really turning education upside down. They're simply telling you, please give us your PPTs. We will turn that into a course. We will put industry, mentors. We will put industry projects. And they're doing really great, actually. So if you have some money to invest, you should invest in Upgrad. So it's becoming very entrepreneurial, right? It's also becoming very business model driven. So now you have situations like, I think, Arizona State University, which says that come take our courses, take our exams, and pay only if you pass. Can you imagine a situation where a university says, well, pay only if you pass? That is, if you're thinking about horrific things that can happen. Yes, you want to add?
I want to add one thing to what you just said.
Okay.
I'm associated now with a new university where it says not when you pass, but we'll take 20% of the increase in your salary over the next 2 years.
That must have been decided by some MBA student because the lifetime value is great. It's really
the investors.
correct.
People are signing up, no tuition. We need 20% increase in salary over the next 2 years.
No, which university is this?
It's called Solars University.
I'm going to quote this with your permission in the next one. But this is really the emergence of the model. Really, in fact, you think about it, that's what it should be. Because I'm adding value to you. And if I'm confident of the value that I'm adding to you, then, you should give me a percentage of that. I'm sure some MBAs, Harvard MBAs behind it? Okay. So our philosophy is a little different. Our philosophy is that, in fact, since you mentioned this, I have to say, our philosophy has been that we will provide education free to the extent possible. And we will play Robin Hood, take from the rich who can pay and then give it to others. So it's very interesting. We started off by saying we'll provide high quality education at a very low cost. But once we finish that initial funding, now the board is asking sometimes, where is the money? So eventually they all come back to the money. But this is such a fantastic model that's emerging. And I think, and more new business models are really coming up. And of course, it's turning out to be legacy and brand neutral. Why would I want to go to Harvard or MIT if I can take the best courses from these places online and a third party certifies it? And so that kind of possibility, can I create my own degrees and so on? And it's constantly evolving. So if you look at future learning spaces, and I don't want to call them universities, future learning spaces would be a combination of traditional institutions, the Harvards, MITs, and IIMs, and IITs, all of them will be there. But we'll have a different kind of role than what we have currently. Investors, edupreneurs, just like you entrepreneurs, now you have edupreneurs, I think, in the educational sector, technologists, and highly socially networked and digitally fluent students. That is the concoction that is going to turn education around. Now the question really for you, is that going to be a poison pill for you? Or is that going to be a poison pill for our universities? I think we have a choice. You can choose to be swept away by these waves of change, or you can choose to be the next billion-dollar companies, right? Byju's. But of course, I'm not so impressed with Shah Rukh Khan actually promoting Byju's. But the fact of the matter, today, education has changed. Education, is in a way, I think we need a new word, and I use that word very, in a considered manner. I think we need to educate students. This is unfortunate, but the fact that you talked about, film stars becoming master teachers. In fact, if you look at master class, you find exactly the same. People who are really gurus in their field come in and do classes. It's a fantastic model. But the whole idea is that you have to make education, by the way, I'm not trivializing education. I'm not trivializing learning. I'm just saying it has to be more appropriate to the audience that we are addressing, right? So that's what we need to really look at. So maybe, I thought this was quite an innovation. Then I saw Google always thinks of everything before us. So the question really is, how do we achieve excellence? And how do our roles as teachers change? We have to really look at all of this. And I think a few basic elements of a really high quality institution still remain relevant, irrespective of what technology really comes in. One, of course, is what is your reach. And the second, of course, is how richness, so depth and breadth of what you do, how relevant you are in the changing context. And we talked about that. If skill sets are different, then it needs to be more, kind of made more relevant. The education. How much of a rigor do you have in place? And then, of course, how resilient your model is to change. That, of course, is a big challenge, because what was resilient for the last few centuries, I think, is not so resilient anymore. Models need to change and so on. So I'm going to take 2-3 more minutes. Where does India figure in all of this, actually? We have the SWAYAM, initiative, and you must look at it because it's a great initiative by the Indian government. Many things can be improved, but, for the government to start something is really useful. But if you look at, the challenge is really not about technology. The challenge is about making sure that technology reaches people. For instance, if you look at worldwide internet user penetration, it's only 53%, and if you look at South Asia, it's even lesser. it's actually 34%. So we really have a problem that we don't actually, we can talk about technology, we can talk about making these courses available, but the fact of the matter is that people don't have access to this. And we had a research group from here that actually did this study in Mysore, and they found that a few kilometers from Mysore, students did not have access to smartphones. And in this country, everybody assumes everybody has a smartphone. That's not true anymore. I mean, that's not true. So you have a really big problem. You also have a problem of enrollment, which is really, if you look at the gross enrollment ratios in higher education, it's actually not so good. So we see we have, I'm going to leave all of this. We see we have actually a huge opportunity. But we also have a serious challenge that the way we are structured now, let me leave all of this. Okay. The way we are structured now, the way our technology is configured now, if you look at the technology penetration in this country, you will find that at the moment there's a long way to go. But it also offers us an opportunity to be pioneers in this space. And that is really what you should be looking at. So what can you do with, how can you use MOOCs? A whole range of things. I don't really want to talk about it. These slides, I'm sure, will be available. But I think I want to end with a quote by Alvin Toffler, where he says, the illiterates of the 21st century will not be people who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. Are we going to be such people? Or are we going to redefine education? Are we going to reimagine education in a way that will make education accessible, high quality education accessible to everyone? Thank you so much for your time. And so I will take one or two, but we will take common questions now. So please tell us, can we have 5 minutes? Amit is missing. So 5 extra minutes we can take, right? We'll take 5 extra minutes and we'll close. So
I'm
if you want to
Professor of
address
International
either one
Business
of us,
from
please
the
tell us.
IIM Institute, Bangalore. My question is, we do also, as teachers, we have learned, now we have to unlearn and relearn. So can you tell us if there are programs specially designed for training teachers on online education?
Okay, so I'm glad you asked that question because I get to kind of do a little bit of PR job for IIM Bangalore. We actually do have several initiatives. We have faculty development programs for people who would like to use, we are really referring to MOOCs in this case, who would like to use that. We do programs every quarter, and the next one is scheduled on August 11th. It's very low priced. It's only 1,000 rupees or 1,500 rupees, I'm not sure. But it's really very low priced, and we'll be happy to take your nominations. Of course, those nominations get really filled very fast. Within a week of our nominations opening, it gets completely closed. So we don't really have any vacancy for the next one. But if there is enough demand, we can do an extra one. That's one. Secondly, our MOOCs process is completely open to anyone. So we have a MOOC on MOOCs, which is basically how do you take technology, create your own courses, how do you disseminate them. The whole process is completely open. It's available on our own platform, IIMBX. It's not open in the sense that you can't simply go in there, but it's open in the sense that if you send us a mail, we'll make it accessible to you at no cost. The third is, I also want to, thank you for asking that question because I get to kind of tell a few things others I would not have said. The third, of course, is we also have a faculty development program. There's a brochure of that with you, where we are, working with faculty to kind of create how do you blend a MOOC into your regular teaching? And that is fully funded. So, you don't really have to pay anything. We have been talking to others and saying, can we fund it? The last thing that we are doing, last two things, you can look at our labs and virtual classrooms, but we also organize a Future of Learning conference that happens every year in January, the first weekend, and I would like to invite you for that and invite all of you for this. The theme this year is actually about Learning 4.0, which is how do you make education more inclusive? We've had about 300 people participating last year, and we think it's actually a conference with which is some research component, policy, as well as practitioners and industry professionals come in. So it's a kind of a policy, technology, academic conference. So I hope. Yeah. So we do some workshops and all of that. We try and, by and large, we keep everything open as much as possible.
Yeah. So one more question here. To both of you can answer. Do you foresee in future that any of the professors, especially retired professors who has established in the area of their expertise, can offer any courses through MOOCs or any other online platforms without any affiliation to their own institutes, maybe retired after retired? And how could it be taken by the learners if certificate is not being the important case being?
No, should I answer? Okay. I can tell you there are two things you can do. One, of course, you can offer courses through SWAYAM, but the institution needs to support it, and therefore, basically, you need an institutional affiliation. But if you don't have that, today there are a lot of entrepreneurs who are coming up, and I can give you several names, who are willing to actually take outstanding faculty and turn them into MOOC stars or whatever, if that word is really there. The point is, we don't really understand the technology so much, and as you were pointing out, there's a lot of things about technology we don't figure out how to face the camera and all of that stuff. But there are really good teams that do this very well. Upgrad is a good example, and there are several others who are like that. You could actually, Emeritus is another one. They could reach out to them, and I think it's not just about making a course. It's also about getting it marketed and so on. That requires a different set of skills. So you could partner with any of them.
That's what, in the case of reputed professors who has established in their expertise. That's what I meant.
I think it's already happening. So you can go, let's just go to edX and see the number of courses. There are a whole range of people offering courses, people from the industry, etc. So if you're a retired professor, you can do it. But as Professor Jose just pointed out, how you're going to market yourself, how will you let the world know that you're offering this course, how will they know that you in your mind might be have the expertise, in your mind you might be established, but the world out there doesn't know that. Doesn't know that you have started this course and how good it is. So that is the hard part. So having the content is actually, sad to say, is not the biggest challenge. Creating it, embedding it in the right technology and disseminating it is the challenge. But there are several platforms out there that do this, so it's going to be quite straightforward to do it. I think what he pointed out also, there's going to be different people that say, I'll take your course and his course and that course, put it together, I'll call it a degree and I'll certify it. And I'll become more. So that's the model which is, people are still fighting over which business model will win, but that's where I think it'll change.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we have to stop because Amit said he's going to cut off the mic. But thank you so much for your time, and Professor Narayan is out there for tea, and so you can have a conversation with him.
Thank you, sirs, for the insightful session. May I now request Professor Dhananjay, Chairperson Admissions, IMT Hyderabad, for presenting a memento to Dr. Narayanan. Professor Dhananjay, may I request Mr. Amit Agnihotri? May I also request Dr. Ravi Kumar Jain, Director, SIBM Hyderabad, to present a memento to Dr. P.T. Jose.
Thank you so much.
An important announcement, ladies and gentlemen, regarding the IMC certificate. Please submit your business card or your name card to the volunteers outside at the speaker's desk. Your certificates will be prepared based on the names that you have given, and it will be distributed at 5 p.m. after the valedictory session. Now we will break till 11:45. After that, please assemble for a special session on Directors Roundtable.